And this relationship between blowing up the Earth and the disturbance of the psyche was so obvious to me that I wondered why there wasn't a term in English that explained this kind of desolation.
Hello, I'm Lane Hartzell with the Korea IT Times, and I'm here with Glenn Albrecht, an environmental philosopher from Australia, Perth. Works in both theoretical and applied interest in relationships between the ecosystem and human health. He was a professor of sustainability at Murdoch University in Western Australia and has pioneered the research domain of psychoterapeutic earth or mental health conditions with the concept of solastalgia and the lived experience of negative environmental change and symbiosis as the way to heal it. He's also published in area of animal ethics, including the ethics of relocating endangered species in the face of climate change pressures. Good morning, Glenn. Nice to see you. You're in
Good
Perth.
morning, Lane.
You're in Sydney this morning, right? Yeah.
That's where I live, yes.
Okay. Let me ask you first about we're talking about biophilia and you call it a victory for life, a victory for love. So biophilia meaning the love of life. And then psychoterapeutica, this area of emotional well-being and some illnesses that could be coming up from this kind of dissociation from the earth. A little of your background. How did you get involved in work on the land? Of course, you in your books, you described growing up on the land, and you just described the critters and all of this kind of thing.
Yes, it's. I didn't grow up on the land technically. I'm a suburban boy from a housing commission suburb in Perth, Western Australia. So the Perth is one of the most isolated capital cities in the world. So it didn't take long for you to get out of Perth and find yourself in what is euphemistically called wilderness. And occasionally the wilderness would remind you that it was there by a kangaroo bounding up my home street in the suburbs. But I had the good fortune of grandparents that lived in the deep southwest of Western Australia. And whenever I was able to visit them with family on Christmas, Easter, other occasions, it was an introduction to a world beyond suburbia because my grandparents had created a self-sufficient farm in the middle of forest. There were crystal clear streams running through their property. The wildlife was rich and interesting. And as a result, as a boy, I had this experience of being able to grow up understanding a really profound distinction between semi-wild places and suburbia. And of course, as I matured, I was able, as a young adult, to take myself to places that were still relatively unpolluted, untouched by the human hand and foot. And then when my family and I moved to the east coast of Australia, to the Hunter Valley of New South Wales, I was able to re-establish a sense of place, to reconnect to wild and relatively pristine environments. And that also gave me the opportunity to compare and contrast those sorts of places to those that were being badly affected by highly toxic industrialization and highly damaging activities on the earth, such as open cut or open pit coal mining.
These open pit coal mines that you describe are just kilometers of just moonscape. But let me quote you about your concept of solastalgia and ask you to talk about the Hunter Valley which what you mentioned there. Uh, Glenn writes, I established the concept of solastalgia based on the unique experience of people in the Hunter Valley of New South Wales, where open cast coal mining was desolating hundreds of square kilometers of the valley. All over the world, there are similar attacks on people and place occurring at escalating rates, and this you call solastalgic distress. Can you talk about this concept?
Sure. The loss of solace from your home environment is the foundation of solastalgia. It also has derivations connected to desolation. The soul in desolation is important as part of its meaning, and desolation is both a condition of the earth and a condition of the mind. And I wanted to emulate a concept which is very old in our history called nostalgia. And nostalgia was experienced by people when absent from home and who wished dearly to return. It was a potentially serious uh, melancholia or malady of the body and the mind. And the creator of the concept of nostalgia, a Swiss physician by the name of Johannes Hofer, thought that nostalgia could kill you. It was such a powerful psychosomatic emotion. And what I noticed with this coal mining area of the Hunter is that there were, at the time I created Solastalgia, there were over 500 square kilometres of land that was previously relatively pristine being desolated by this activity. You blow up the surface of the earth, you excavate it, you then expose the coal seams, you blow them up in order to pulverize them so that they're in a form that can be put into trucks. And then they're taken to trains take them to power stations or ships, and the ships take them to the power stations of the world. And this relationship between blowing up the earth and the disturbance of the psyche was so obvious to me that I wondered why there wasn't a term in English that explained this kind of desolation. And then I realized that maybe there are other concepts in other languages, but English being theoretically a universal language, not having such a word was clearly an omission, clearly something needed to be put in to explain this feeling. And it was more than just an exercise in wordsmithing, it was also that the people in the Hunter Valley who were being affected by this mining were quite clearly emotionally and physically distressed by what was happening to them. The neighbour from hell had moved in and was blowing up the place. It was destroying the nightlife because they worked 24/7, 365 days a year. The stench from the methane released from the exposed coal, all of those things were destroying their sense of place, their quality of life. And so I realized that their identity as rural folk, as people in a region that had a history of being the Tuscany of the South, a beautiful place
Right.
for Europeans to be, and not to dismiss for a moment the idea that this was Wanawura land. The local indigenous people had been there for at least 20,000 years and possibly a lot longer. And so this impact on people was being totally neglected by the destroyers of the earth. You do environmental impact assessment, and they were concerned about water quality and air quality and whether or not the noise would be too loud, but they didn't actually assess the psychological impacts of a huge, you can see this development from Google Maps and Google Earth satellites.
Mm.
It's absolutely massive, and so the fact that we weren't even assessing the impact of this massive change to a regional landscape at a psychological or mental health level or at an emotional level struck me as being a massive gap or loss in the attempt to understand what it is that is going on in place. So I wrote an article on solastalgia, which was about human identity and sense of place. So I tried to locate this new concept within an existing literature. It's also worth bearing in mind that the word algia has multiple meanings. It's not just pain in a biomedical sense, it's an emotional concept as well. It means you're suffering emotional pain. It also has connotations of grief and distress. So there was no attempt to define this concept of solastalgia as a biomedical concept. If it was an illness, it was something that was making you ill at ease. If it was a disease, there's a hyphen between the dis and the ease. It's a lack of ease. It's not something which is a lesion in the brain. So I've worked hard to establish that concept over many years now. It was first created in the year 2003, and I first published on it as a sole author in the year 2005. And I've collaborated with colleagues and friends at the University of Newcastle, where I worked for a couple of decades, on developing the idea further, particularly collaborating with a psychological or a psychologist by the name of Nick Higginbotham, who was much more empirically minded than myself, and he has worked on the environmental distress scale, otherwise known as the EDS. And so he measures what I think about. I'm not particularly interested in the empirical side of it. I'm more on the philosophical, I guess, humanistic, psychological side. That's where I sit. But nevertheless, it now has had a long history, the concept of solastalgia, and it continues to make an impact on the way people view the human hyphen nature relationship.
There's been a number of mentions of this, and there's been, like, say, for example, in the New York Times, there's been artwork based on your work and so forth. So your work is getting out into the culture, which is, I argue, this kind of thing is necessary. One thing that came to mind when you talk about this this dislocation of a sense of place when you're still in place. I'm thinking of Gary Snyder and this kind of work. The Native Americans in the United States talk about, this kind of distress where they say the border crossed us. We didn't go anywhere,
Yeah,
this kind of,
yeah. Well, it can get worse than that. The concept of Koyaanisqatsi, a place in that's causing grief, turmoil, a place disintegrating. So again, that's a wonderful word, but it's got at least two U's in it, a Q and a couple of other double I's. It's a word, when translated into English, is very difficult to use. I wanted to create a word that had similar connotations, but one that could be A, understood in English, and B, had some connection to past what we call psychoterratic terminology in the English language. And nostalgia was it. There was nothing else.
Right, right. But this wordsmithing that you've done, you've developed a number of new concepts to help us to understand, these psychological states. I've seen it in Psychology Today and so forth. So there's solastalgia, there's symbiocene. Can you talk a little bit more about some of these words? So symbiocene would be symbiosis and a geological age where humans actually connect back to the earth. Is this how?
Yes, exactly. What I've created, and I hope it's useful, is this thing I call the psychoterratic typology, or a scale, ranging from, it covers both positive and negative emotional states that we have in relation to the earth, the state of the earth. And it's a spectrum that ranges from the mild to the extreme, both on the positive and negative sides. The reason for creating it is that I felt in English, and in particular the Western's English speaking culture, of which I am a part and from which I emerged, the whole idea of a language connected to the state of the earth was absent, in my view, in English. It was just a huge gap. Now, of course, poets and other creative people had observed and covered in their literature, in their creative works, this sense of there being a spectrum from that which is sublime to that which is absolutely despotic. But we didn't actually have a specific language within which to to continue understanding our evolving relationship between ourselves and the rest of life and nature. So, born in 1953, I've felt this profound sense of change as my life has unfolded, that we are now in a period of such intense and rapid change that our language has failed to keep pace with the emotional landscape within which we find ourselves. Of course, it's not the only thing that we could study, but it seemed to me as a philosopher and as a creative thinker that here's a massive gap in our thinking that needs to be filled. And so the psychoterratic, solastalgia, its opposites, words like eutieria, a good earth feeling, a feeling similar to Freud's discussion of the oceanic feeling. These are ways that I've attempted to point out that if you feel solastalgia, you must also have felt its opposite. If you feel the need for an opposite, do we have a language to describe this good end of the psychoterratic spectrum where we're feeling at one with the earth, feeling its majesty, its beauty, its closeness. And so I've had to create a whole new language to try and describe how we can get out of the dilemma of solastalgia and worse, and enter a reconnection to life and the good end of the psychoterratic spectrum. And of course, that's where we come from. We're a species that's evolved out of 3.5 billion years of life symbiotically connecting to itself, becoming more complex, becoming more diverse. That's the story of life. It's only in the last 300 years that humans have decided to somehow separate themselves from that evolutionary direction of which we were a part and become its opposite. And so the Symbiocene, the idea of a period in history where we reintegrate with the life that we left, is something that's dear to my heart. And I think something which is sorely needed at a time of desolation, at a time of profound emotional, psychological distress that people worldwide are feeling about the fate of themselves and their beautiful earth, particularly young people. And I partly created the Symbiocene as a way of giving young people a notion of a future that they'd like to be not only in, but to create themselves. It becomes an act of creation. And so that seems to me to be my life's work. That's what I've been doing over the last almost 3 decades. The psychoterratic is the focus. Explaining the negative and the positive is the role of language and conceptual development. A lot of it's new because I believe our language, the English language in particular, has not been adequate to explain the nuances of these feelings. Plus, a lot of them are new anyway. We haven't lived in a globally interconnected culture in our past history. We need globally interconnected ways of communicating amongst ourselves about the nice things about this, and also those which are disastrous or hugely negative. And so that's the work that I've been undertaking. And of course, the typology has many different positive and negative terms that are new. I don't expect all of them to suddenly become as successful as solastalgia. In fact, many of the negative ones I hope become, never successful. They're so awful. They're beyond solastalgia that I wish to defeat them before they even enter into our common language. So it's a kind of way of it's establishing a drama using concepts that point the way out of a hugely negative future that we look as though we're heading towards, and to embrace a different concept of the future, a different direction for the future, which is not inconsistent with evolution. It's entirely consistent with the evolution of life. It's entirely consistent with the science of symbiosis. It has a lot going for it. In fact, I would argue it's got a lot more going for it than the alternatives. So I just persist in putting out this uh, uh, what do we call it? It's a different metaphor, a different meme, a different paradigm, and hope that it finds a home in the minds of other people and leads to social change, because that's exactly what I'm committed to.
Yeah, when you talk about this language connected to the earth, I think of like in my country, Gary Snyder, Derek Jensen, Vine Deloria, in Mexico, Octavio Paz, and some of the Latin American poet philosophers. I think that maybe it's time overdue to consult with the poet philosophers again, as if it's kind of been left off. The vision that you would have that would be positive would be like, say we do a hypothetical deductive, we look into the future, we the geologists of the future say that at this time, say 2025 or whatever, we could see a marked change between CO2 levels going down, uh, you know, fossil fuel use going down and so forth, and then the earth regenerating. One thing that's really interesting that I tell people when I'm out and about is, remember during the pandemic, within like not even maybe a month or two, something like that, the wildlife is back in the city or back in the cities. Banana trees are growing up, this kind of thing. I'm in Thailand right now. So, I mean, can you talk about this kind of, like, say if we have a hypothetical deductive looking back on this time and this positive symbiocene and symbiosis that you talk about, biophilia?
Mm. Well, Lake Crawford in Canada, Ontario, is used as a marker for the Anthropocene. So, in the attempt to justify the idea that we're in a new geological era characterized by human dominance over all the major life cycles, events, happenings on the Earth, Earth systems theory in all of its
Mhm.
glory. By scraping off samples of the mud from the bottom of Lake Crawford, you're able to show the distinctive human presence as a band in geology, hence a geologically inspired idea of a new era called the Anthropocene. Been rejected by the geologists of the Earth, but we all know that geologists have a vested interest in digging up things and burning them. So
It
I'm not surprised.
takes
I'm not
time, right?
surprised at their rejection of it. The Lake Crawford could also be the point at which we find uh, uh, biological evidence of the Symbiocene as, in fact, a geological era. I've written that in Earth Emotions. It's actually there as part of my speculation about the future. That when we start seeing a layer of organic mud replacing plastic and all the crap of the Anthropocene, we'll know that we're heading into the Symbiocene, this era where we are reintegrating with the rest of life in a non-toxic, non ecocidal way. And so these, when we do backcasting as a futurist, so you posit the Symbiocene as a place where we would like to head, and then we think about, well, how do we go about achieving that goal or that destination? I would argue that we're already on track. We're beginning to shift from the highly toxic, highly polluting, one-off extraction of finite resources, and we're finding that using human ingenuity and creativity, we're actually able to produce things like mycelium-based bricks. Or I read recently of concrete that is injected with bacteria that can actually store electricity. And we don't kill the bacteria; we
Ah,
actually keep feeding them so that they can continue to store electricity for our use. I
mhm.
mean, that's my ultimate ideal, is that we don't just cook mycelium in ovens so that we get nice bricks. We actually live with other organisms in a way that allows them the word is to thrive. That seems to be the buzzword. But we ourselves are also able to thrive. That it doesn't necessarily involve the death and destruction of life wholesale. Now, of course, well, we struggle to imagine that at the moment. And in particular, we struggle to imagine it because our brains are infected with a kind of parasitic worm that says it's all gloom and doom. We're not only living like parasites, we've been infected by them. So it's kind of the zombie mentality. So in a sense, it's very hard for us to imagine a future other than the one the doomsayers and the eco-apocalyptic people are presenting to us. It's actually it's newsworthy. People like reading about the destruction of.
Hollywood.
Yeah, that's it. It's you can sell disaster, whereas
Right.
selling the symbiote scene is a much harder job. And it doesn't pay well. I can assure you of that. The idea that you could make money out of a good news story is almost laughable in 2025. So it requires persistence. It requires a kind of ornery personality like I have, which says, I actually don't care what the opposition is throwing at me. It's ultimately self-contradictory. It's ultimately self-defeating.
Mhm.
That the science is on my side, not on theirs. The life of parasites that kill their host is very short.
Mhm.
They disappear in evolution very quickly. If we wish to remain part of life, then the direction we need to take is crystal clear.
Right, right. Yeah, I think it's important for people to understand that it's not so much about gloom and doom. What it's about is being taking an honest assessment, looking at what the climate scientists are saying or the Earth system scientists are saying is, look, we've got a problem. But it's like a diagnostics. It's not like let's get into it. Oh, we're gonna, we're so bad. And we kind of go, okay, we got this, but we also have things that can be done, like this rematerialization that you talk about. Like rematerialization, I envision like like this concrete. I mean, since we use so much of it, why not make it bio available or what biocompatible, I guess.
I call it symbioactive.
Exactly. Okay.
So it allows us to have an active, ongoing symbiotic relationship with life. It happens to produce electricity, or it happens to produce food, or it happens to produce
Right.
furniture like chairs. We're now using algae to produce plastic substitutes.
Exactly. Yeah.
So these are all present. They're not future. This is not science fiction.
Right.
So it's quite clear to me that we can head in that direction without it requiring this massive uh, um, change in the way that we as humans have evolved, our cultures, our languages, our moods, our psychologies. But at the moment, I mean, you mentioned Freud and civilization and its discontents in
An email. Yeah.
your correspondence with me. And of course, there is a struggle going on between those elements of human nature which are entirely life affirming and creative and those that are destructive.
Mhm.
And Freud was brilliant at pointing out that dialectic, which often ends in destruction, psychosis, and destruction. The whole idea of a culture that's tearing itself apart and committing genocide on massive scales. It's part of being human. But I argue that it's a bit like Hobbes's view of nature that if humans were really like that, we would have wiped ourselves out
Yeah.
within 1 or 2 generations of our
We
emergence.
wouldn't need bombs. It would already been done long
That's
time.
right. Yeah, so it would have been a very short uh, evolutionary trajectory that we were on. So here we are, way past Hobbes, way past the Neanderthals and the Cro-Magnons, and we're actually 8+ billion of us madly creating a so-called civilization. And now its discontents are profound. We are realizing, what we are doing to ourselves is massively destructive and negative. And so instead of thinking, oh, well, that's what we're like, so we can't do anything about it, we may as well just hold hands and hug each other
Go
while
down on
the
the
earth.
Titanic.
Yeah, that's it. Uh, let's engage our better selves, if I can put it very simply. Uh, that involves creativity and intelligence. It requires science. It requires huge emotional engagement with each other as well, with
Mhm.
emotions that are with us. They're not something we have to invent, and get on with it. And that's a far better future than the alternative at the moment. So I see us as in a perilous state right now. So I'm not going
Sure.
to say, look, let's just do this. It's easy. It's going to be hard. It's going to be full of conflict. Just how much conflict I think I underestimated badly in my book Earth Emotions.
Mhm.
Now, 5 years later, as I write a new book on the Symbiocene, I have to confront the fact that the forces of disassociation, uh, the parasite view of the world,
Mhm.
uh, is in ascendancy, and I have to think doubly hard about, as a philosopher, well, how do we get out of this? I mean, they look as though they're winning.
Mm. I think that this concept of the Symbiocene is a really great like I said, hypothetical deductive. Like we're geologists looking back on this time and the kind of changes that were made for regeneration, rewilding, and all of this kind of thing. Glenn, thank you so much. I've enjoyed talking to you. I've been speaking with Glenn Albrecht of Earth Emotions. This is his book, and nice talking to you.
And a pleasure talking to you, Lane. Thank you.